All right, what's happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from Street Scores, and we're coming with part 2 of the Rivera Speak series. Again, Rivera's been getting interviewed left and right with all of this Super Bowl coverage. Julie Donaldson of the Washington Commanders media staff spoke to him as well. But Rivera's been talking to NFL Total Access. He's been talking to everybody. He's been speaking on a lot of major issues. Just like the last video, talked about Sam Howell and being QB1 and the potential of bringing in a top veteran quarterback option or even drafting a quarterback in the first round. Rivera spoke on all of that. Again, I keep saying it throughout these videos, but I'm just so surprised that this isn't more viral amongst Commanders fans at the very least, because he literally spoke on everything. This video is part 2. We're going to talk about this whole Chase Young situation and Daron Payne. Again, I'm separating all of the major topics into separate videos because I feel like they all deserve their own deep dives, and we got to talk about what Rivera said. I got to give my opinions, got to look at it from every angle possible. Y'all know how Rico at Street Scores works. And again, this one is the Chase Young Daron Payne one, but we still got to talk about this whole Eric Bieniemy and offensive coordinator thing. And Rivera even spoke on what are his priorities and looking for the next offensive coordinator. There's also some major news as far as Dan Snyder selling the team, as far as a timeline, who's in the lead, and how much money he exactly wants from it, from a very trustworthy source, how much he wants in the purchase of the team, like an exact number basically. And also Rivera spoke on Chris Harris leaving to go to the Titans, and also a potential offensive coordinator candidate, Charles London, also leaving to go to the Titans. So these are all different videos where we're going to do deep dives into all of these situations. But again, we got to talk about Chase Young and Daron Payne right now. But before we do, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell next to the subscription button so you get notification immediately and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you pull up every Sunday for the call-in show. Again, this is a live call-in show every Sunday, except for if something crazy happens, something comes up. Other than that, I'm here live streaming with y'all. I'm opening up the phone lines for y'all to call in. You voice your opinions, you ask whatever questions you may have. We talk quarterback, offensive coordinator, draft, free agency, everything. You can even pull up and let me know what your mock draft is for the Commanders. Anything. It can even be outside of Commanders. It could be general football, it could be basketball, whatever. Make sure you call in. That's the point of the call-in show, the live call-in show, for y'all to be a part of the show and voice your opinions. And without further ado, let's get it. All right, so the first thing that came out, one of the major things that Rivera said from this Super Bowl coverage is that the Commanders aren't guaranteed to pick up defensive end Chase Young's $17.452 million fifth-year option. Remember, Young only played 3 games this year because he was recovering from a torn ACL that he suffered in November of 2021. And then when he came back, he had a couple of plays here and there, but he wasn't looking as great as we'd hoped. I mean, all of those pass rush moves that we were hoping he would build on while he was hurt, all of the technique stuff, all of the counters, all having the rush plan and everything like that, mostly pass rush wise, he was pretty disappointing. I mean, I was looking like, what was all that work with Von Miller for during the offseason? Like, what did we learn? I told y'all, man, Chase Young needs to get that Ip Man little wooden thing with the little, like, he just need to practice that all day or something. Somebody get this man into some type of karate, man. I'm sick of it. Albert Breer posted all of the fifth-year options totals for 2020 first-round picks. They've officially been distributed to all NFL teams. Here are the numbers for the 4 different categories. Deadline to pick up the options is the week after the draft. Guys who are eligible for a fifth-year option that have made 2 or more Pro Bowls, and it gets crazy because quarterback, if you pick up that fifth-year option, they're due for $32.4 million in one season for the 2024 season. That is crazy and scary. And it's each position group for each category. The second category is players selected to 1 Pro Bowl. The third section is players who played a certain amount of time but didn't make any Pro Bowls. And then the last section is players who didn't even play enough for it to even really matter. Now, sadly, Chase Young, if he didn't make any Pro Bowls, he probably would have been that 4th category, and his 5th-year option would have been $12.141 million rather than the $17.452 million. But you got to remember, Chase Young did make the Pro Bowl his rookie season when he won Defensive Rookie of the Year. So that's kind of coming back to haunt us, because that makes him more than $5 million more expensive than if he didn't make the Pro Bowl. But I'm still happy that he did. But, you know, you just got to look at things like that as far as team building wise, being a GM, being an owner, being a head coach. That's really crazy because he hasn't played like a Pro Bowler since, sadly for us. But one thing, though, even though pass rushing wise, not great. Even though I liked in his debut, he was able to get his hands up and bat down a pass, and he was arguably our best defensive player that day overall. But he does need to work on his pass rush moves. He need to work on everything pass rushing, everything technique. If he can become even half the technician of a Nick Bosa, he's an all-pro. The athleticism is that crazy, the potential is that crazy, but it just seems like he's not even making progress as far as technique goes, which is the most frustrating part. But at the end of the day, man, Chase Young, Chris Cooley brings up a great point, and I've been saying this the entire time, even when he was hurt and recovering from his torn ACL. Chris Cooley said Chase Young is at worst a top 10 run defender, and then at the very least a decent pass rusher. Again, at his worst. So picking up his fifth-year option should be a no-brainer. So for me, I would personally pick up his fifth-year option because I completely agree with Chris Cooley. But at the same time, it's really interesting why the Commanders more than likely will not pick up the fifth-year option, which takes us to what Rivera said on the situation. Going directly off of Richmond.com, Michael Phillips said Rivera's most surprising comments came on the topic of Chase Young's fifth-year option. The coach suggesting that declining it and having Young play on a contract year could be a motivating factor, as it was when the team didn't give Daron Payne a long-term deal last year. Rivera said, quote, "That's what we did with Daron. It cost us. But it cost us in a good way because the young man played. He did things the right way. He didn't sit out. He didn't withhold. He could have done that sit-in during the training camp, but he didn't. And because he didn't, now we're in the position where we have to find a way to say thank you. Okay, you've earned it." If you look at what Daron did, why wouldn't you think of it that way? As a motivator. Believe me, that would be my approach, especially looking at what Daron did in the situation he put himself in. And then asked what goes into the decision on Young, Rivera responded, quote, "Well, what goes into that is you get that opportunity to sit down, look at his tape with our scouts, and talk about the way he played. What do we see in terms of development and growth? We're going to sit down with the doctors, with the trainers. Where is he? How do you feel? Is this something that's going to be long term? Hey, no worries. As long as nothing crazy happens, he's going to be fine. It's worth the risk." You know what I'm saying? We have to go through the process more so than anything else, unquote. The biggest and most noteworthy quote from this entire thing is the fact that, which takes me back to my point, I feel like you do give him the fifth-year option, but Rivera is saying that we will not because we want to motivate him to go out there and play his best football, which at this point you can't necessarily argue against, because Daron Payne, we were having debates about, is Daron Payne, I mean, I know he has all of this potential. You could argue he has a higher ceiling than Jonathan Allen, but we just weren't necessarily seeing it in the production. We weren't seeing it on the field, especially on a consistent basis. We were seeing flashes, but we weren't seeing consistent dominance. So what did the Commanders do? Not pick up his fifth-year option. He's in a contract year. Don't pay him long term. Let him go out there and earn that money. And then Daron Payne has the best year of his career by far. Led the team in sacks with what I believe 11.5, which is insane for an interior defensive lineman. Even with us playing an extra game per season, that's still pretty crazy. I think he was third in sacks out of interior defensive linemen out of the entire NFL, even more than Jonathan Allen. So how can I argue against using that strategy again, but instead of with Daron Payne, for Chase Young, to try to get the most out of him and make him earn that next contract? That's really interesting. At this point, I can't argue against it. Again, I would personally go ahead and give Chase Young that fifth-year option, but I could definitely see why a lot of people feel like he hasn't earned it. And then again, with the fact that he's made the Pro Bowl once, even though he hasn't done anything else since, except for in the preseason game against the Panthers where he got the Cam Newton, and I was like, oh man, he's about to be even better than he was when he won Defensive Rookie of the Year. Then everything else after that has just been meh. Mostly because he was hurt though, but still, even when he wasn't hurt, it wasn't that much. And again, after what Daron Payne did and how he responded to not getting his money just yet and having to go out there and earn it, hopefully we can see the same ascension in Chase Young's production and game. And it's kind of interesting because the Commanders kind of have examples of both. Daron Payne balled out and played his best football of his life on a contract year on his final year of his deal. Whereas Jonathan Allen and Terry McLaurin, if anything, after they got paid, they got even better, which is something every team, every fan base hopes that their players do. After you give them the big money, the only thing they do is get better and not get worse, or at the very least be as good as you were before you got the money. Jonathan Allen and Terry McLaurin took it to another level after they got paid, which is actually pretty rare. So it's kind of funny because it just seems like, you know, you can say whatever you want about Rivera, and I'm not the biggest Rivera fan either, but he knows how to at least manage that part, which guys to pay now and which guys to pay later. as a way to motivate them. So I'm really interested in seeing how this Chase Young not giving him his 5th-year option experiment goes, man. I'm really excited about that. I mean, that's crazy to, first of all, even just say that out loud. Like, obvious. Like, Chase Young is hearing that. He's seeing that, oh, you're not giving me my money because you want me to go out there and prove myself. And I'm pretty sure Rivera would tell him to his face. I'm pretty sure Rivera would tell it to his face in front of the other teammates. I think Ron Rivera does want that message sent, but that's still pretty interesting. Definitely a little headline worthy for sure. And again, it just sucks because Chase Young, even though he hasn't done anything since making that one Pro Bowl, makes his 5th-year option over $5 million more expensive, and that probably is also being taken into account by Ron Rivera. Do we want to spend an extra $5 million than we should have, even though he hasn't really done much for us since that rookie season? Now, moving on, speaking of Daron Payne, Ron Rivera spoke about that as well, and from what I'm seeing, everything he said about Daron Payne definitely sounds like the type of guy that he wants to bring back long term. He does not intend on letting this guy walk. First of all, with everything that he said in that previous quote when talking about Chase Young, but he mentioned Daron Payne in it, he basically said that we put him in a situation where you got to go earn that next contract. Now, what do we look like to not give him that contract when he's exceeded expectations even beyond what we hoped for? First of all, what message does that send to the rest of the team? Not only just Daron Payne, I mean, if granted we paid Jonathan Allen and Terry McLaurin the money that they wanted, and you can even kind of count Charles Leno and Logan Thomas as well, even though those haven't worked out as well as the other two previously mentioned, but still, we've been doing a fairly good job of paying guys that deserve it that are currently on the team. But at the same time, after you challenge Daron Payne like that and you don't pay him, you don't find a way to get him locked down long term, that can get a little ugly in the locker room, man. That could definitely send some bad messages. I mean, you saw how much fun Daron Payne was having with his teammates, so he clearly wants to come back, at least for the camaraderie of it. But the numbers do got to be right. I'm pretty sure if I'm Daron Payne and his agent, the numbers got to be right. But what message does that send to the rest of the team if you don't get Daron Payne locked down long term? And then also, what does it send to other free agents on other teams? Why would I go to the Commanders as a free agent, especially after the William Jackson fiasco, if they're going to challenge Daron Payne to have a better season to earn his next contract, and then he even exceeds those expectations and they don't pay him? What does that look like to everybody currently on the team and then free agents on other teams looking at potentially coming to the Commanders? What does that look like? So you got to find a way to pay Daron Payne at the very least for that. But one really interesting quote, this one came from John Comm. He said that the Commanders have reached out to Daron Payne's representatives, but no money has been discussed yet. But they've been talking. There's some talks going on there. We'll see how that goes. We'll see how long it takes. We need to go ahead and get that situation. He needs to be signed immediately, like during the tampering period. Like not when free agency officially opens up, not when the new league year starts, but the tampering period. We need to have Daron Payne signed long-term that day. We do not want to let this get out of hand because a lot of the top interior defensive linemen in the NFL are either on their final contracts going into this upcoming 2023 season, or they're already an unrestricted free agent in this 2023 free agency period. So a lot of these guys will probably go ahead and get their big money, like Chris Jones, for example, arguably the best interior defensive lineman this past season in the entire NFL. Even though he's on his last year, he still has another year left in his contract. The Chiefs may go ahead and find a way to get ahead of that and go ahead and pay him long term this offseason, for example. And then there's other guys out there too, man. I mean, most of the guys that at the very least received one All-Pro vote fit in one of those two categories: 2023 free agent or 2024 one, which makes them likely to end up getting a long-term contract even this offseason. You want to go ahead and get Daron Payne out the way first, because the more interior defensive linemen that get signed before Daron Payne, the price is just going to go up, 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 up. Market just going to go up, 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 up. It can get really ugly. It can get really scary, and it can get to the point where it's out of reach for the Commanders to sign Daron Payne long-term. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Let me know how you feel about this entire Chase Young situation, this entire Daron Payne situation. Let me know if you're optimistic about us keeping both long-term. Will Chase Young answer to the call and step up and earn that next contract? Daron Payne, who earned his next contract, will he end up getting it with the Commanders? Let me know how you feel about this whole situation. Are you more optimistic or are you more pessimistic in the situation? And of course, man, I appreciate all the support, man. Shout out to all of my sponsors, especially my Pro Bowl sponsors, whose names you see scrolling on the screen right now. Leave a like on this video if you liked it, if you learned anything. And of course, like I said, this is only part 2 of like 5 or 6 parts with everything that Rivera has talked about with all of the Super Bowl coverage. So make sure you stay tuned for more of them. This is the second one, coming out with probably 2 or 3 more. And without further ado, catch y'all later. I'm out.